So we're going to take a look at the EX11 project, which is in my Java 8 folder in my live lessons GitHub repository. And if you go there, you'll see a kind of a fun test that shows the improper use of the Stream.peek intermediate operation. And the key thing to remember about peek is that it's not intended to have any manipulative side effects. It's not supposed to change anything. It's just supposed to basically be there for sort of debugging purposes or logging purposes. And if you start doing things in peek that are destructive to the underlying stream or the underlying data structure, chaos and insanity will going to be resulting. And this little test just illustrates that. And it also shows the slight differences you get in terms of the degree of chaos and insanity for doing this with sequential streams versus parallel streams. So here's the test program. We come in here, and depending on whether we have any command line parameters or not, that indicates whether we use a sequential stream or a parallel stream. As you can see here, by default, we use a parallel stream, but it's very easy to toggle that by coming over to the edit configurations part. Let's just put, whatever the heck we want to in here. Doesn't really matter what it says. It just needs to be an argument of some kind. And so that'll make it run sequentially first. Then we come down here and we create a list of 10 integers in the range, basically 0 through 9. And you can see we do this by using the range method on int stream. So we make a stream of ints between 0 to 9. We then go ahead and box them. So now they're integers, not just ints, and we collect those into a list. Pretty straightforward. Then we do something kind of funky and cool, which I like to use this idiom a lot in my programs, especially my test programs, where I say, hey, are we using a sequential stream or not? And if we are using a sequential stream based on the parameter that's passed in, we just skip over this if statement. But if we're not using a sequential stream, we tell the stream, please convert yourself into a parallel stream. So this converts the sequential stream into a parallel stream. So that's a nice idiom to know because that allows you to be able to change the property of the stream dynamically based on whatever conditions warrant changing from one to the other. And of course, if you had a parallel stream, you could change it back to sequential if you wanted to as well. Now, here's where we do the fun, destructive stuff that we're not supposed to do. We're going to use the peek operation, which, as I mentioned before, is really, it's not intended to modify anything. It's really just intended to kind of be a debugging hook or a logging hook in your stream so you can get a better sense of what's happening. And what we're going to do, just to be ornery, we're going to take the list and we're going to call the remove operation on the list, which of course is about as destructive as you can get because we're modifying the underlying data structure that's being worked upon by the streams mechanism. And not surprisingly, bad things are likely to happen, which they will. And then we go ahead and we call the for each terminal operation, and we're going to call the display method reference, which will print out the thread ID, and it'll also print out the integer that we're trying to print here. So let's go ahead and see if we can run this. We're going to run it, and it'll build. And what'll happen here is everything will be in the main thread ID 1. And you can see we make it a bit through the list, and then all of a sudden, boom, bad things occur, and we get a bunch of nulls. And there's some kind of exception, not entirely clear what that exception is, but clearly bad things are happening, which we don't like. So let's come back over here and let's go ahead and change this a little bit. So we went and removed the program argument. And what we're going to do now is run the program again. And we should see a couple of differences, but the overall effect will be more or less the same. You can see this time that the threads that we're running are different from the main thread, largely different. And that's because this is running in the common fork join pool because it's a parallel stream. And you can see it gets a little bit further along at some level, but the consequence is still pretty much the same. We're getting a concurrent modification exception at a couple places, and chaos and insanity is occurring. And probably it looks like even more chaos and insanity is occurring here than was the case earlier with the sequential stream. So the bottom line here is you really don't want to be doing operations in peek that have these destructive side effects. That's not what peek is intended for. And this is kind of a rookie mistake. I honestly don't know whether I've really ever tried to do this, but it's really there as a cautionary tale to be aware of what peek is supposed to do. And it's really just there to do debugging or logging kinds of operations. So this fun little program demonstrates some things not to do with streams. And I think it's also cool because it shows how you can conditionally toggle back and forth between a sequential stream and a parallel stream.